everybody. My name is Brad Muniz. I'm a partner at Sobel & Company, and I would like to thank you for attending Sobel Insights. Sobel Insights is a weekly series to provide some brief information on various topics. Our goal is to keep these sessions to 15 minutes. At this point, we do not offer CPE. If we get into the world of nano credit, we'll be happy to offer CPE. If you have any ideas for topics or speakers, please feel free to reach out to me. My information will come up at the end of the presentation. Today, we're going to be speaking on or getting information on retirement plan record keeping. Speaking with us today is Allison Smith with the Principal Financial Group. Allison is a lead principal retirement operations. He leads principal retirement operations from New Jersey up through New England. And I was talking with her, so I feel bad for her because she has to deal with Yankee fans and Red Sox fans. Hopefully, she keeps the Philly fans out of there. Nothing against the Philly fans. So, Allison, what is the difference between a record keeper as compared with a plan administrator or a trustee? Because I'm sure everybody's confused with those topics.
Yeah, Brad, thanks. I think that when you talk about some of those topics, people use them interchangeably. They also use plan sponsor in there. And in the world that we're in today, it is important to know some of the nuances of what that looks like, especially since the fact that there are some new plan designs that came out with the Secure Act that came out at the end of 2019 that make those definitions much more important from an overall fiduciary and administrative outsourcing perspective. So with that, the plan administrator of the plan is technically the same, the company, the plan sponsor. So typically that plan administrator is the person that's responsible for all of the operational compliance that's defined under ERISA. It's very common that most of those responsibilities, even though the company is the named plan administrator, that they delegate those over to a record keeper or a third-party administrator. But technically, the plan administrator is the plan sponsor or the company that's there. The reason that that's also interesting is that in the world of multiple employer plans that came out with the Secure Act, they have the ability to actually no longer have the company be named the plan administrator, but rather have an independent fiduciary or a plan administrator be named. So for example, in Principal's PEP, the pooled employer plan, we actually are the plan administrator that's on the plan now rather than the local plan sponsor or the company. So those are just some nuances of what are there, but ultimately the plan administrator is a corporate function. Then, as I mentioned, they have the ability to delegate some of those responsibilities out to a record keeper or a third-party administrator. So the third-party administrator is typically the one who might do the 5500, they might do the plan document, they might do testing, they might be the one who handles loans and things along those lines. Very frequently, third-party administrators take on more of the consultative and administrative responsibility directly with the plan sponsor. And then the record keeper either can also be the third-party administrator, or they could just be the record keeper, which is the web interface with the participants. It can be a lot of participant transactions. It can also house the money that's associated with the plan, and essentially is the face to the plan participant at the company. So those are a couple of different nuances that have come out today. But I think the main thing when you look at the definitions is, number one, who are the right definitions within your organization and your current setup? And number two, who do you want them to be? Is there an argument to be made for it maybe not being some of the traditional folks that were holding those roles, but rather to do some different delegation to best manage both your fiduciary responsibility, but also the efficiency of your time that can therefore create some cost efficiencies for the organization?
You hit on two very key points that I try and tell clients and other people that I speak with, efficiencies and fiduciary responsibilities. The Department of Labor, they do not take this area lightly. This is the participants' money, this is their retirement funds that we're worried about, and they want this as protected as can be. Accordingly, they're not going to look too highly if somebody thinks they could be the chief cook, bottle washer, and try and handle everything. The fiduciary responsibilities are tremendous here, and I'm not preaching. but the efficiency, people do much better making widgets than they do trying to handle their retirement plan. Unless they're a retirement plan company, then by all means, go ahead and do it. So
Yeah.
you mentioned the CARES Act, and I saw that in a lot of financial statements last year. And I don't know, maybe some people have been living under a rock. I don't know that if they know that something happened in 2020, called COVID and Corona, and that kind of started changing some of the plans and some of the responsibilities. But what trends are you seeing in 2021 from a record keeper standpoint that companies should know about?
Yes, and I think that that's a really good question as it relates to the first point of defining roles and responsibilities. The first trend is exactly to your point on efficiency, is that it's more delegation. I think that in the past, the number of record keepers and administrators out there was so voluminous that a lot of times plan sponsors wouldn't see that there was a differentiation between some of the people they were working with, or they were told these are the things they needed to do and they just did them. That was just their responsibility as it relates to the retirement program. Now, the average company is becoming much more aware of what they can legally delegate to a third party that would be a better use of their resources. You hit the point of who's the right person to be the fiduciary on the plan? Who's the right person to process loans? Who's the right person to sign off on hardships? Is it somebody that's at the company who is, like you said, making widgets? Or is it somebody that this is all they do every day? And what's really nice is that in today's world of delegation, you can typically delegate a lot of responsibilities with your cost of that delegation being at the same or lower than what they might have had in their environment where they were doing all the work. So a big trend that we have right now is delegation. Another sub point on that delegation is doing more payroll integration. That's something where it used to be very limited number of plan sponsors had a direct link of their payroll to their record keeper. Now it's much more common. And even if it's not a direct link, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of multiple employer plans that plan sponsors have the ability to evaluate right now. And what those multiple employer plans allow them to do is to not be that plan, that named plan administrator, but rather have another sponsor of their overall plan. There's lots of different forms that they could take just depending on the individual situation. But if you decide that that's the right fit for your organization, that can mean that there's someone else that's actually the named loan administrator. There's someone else who's the named payroll administrator. So they're interfacing with your payroll system, even if there's not a direct link between the provider. The other thing that those multiple employer plans can do is help with the efficiency of audit processes, just depending on how they're in. There's a new plan design that's called group of plans that could consolidate one audit for multiple different plans. So there is efficiency just in those type of organizations. And I think the trend is that there's a greater awareness of the benefits you could get from evaluating if the process that you're doing today is still the right process to handle your retirement plan, or if you might benefit from something that's more efficient or just a different way of looking at things. And typically what we're finding the trend is, yes, there is a different, if you look at it a little bit different and you ask the question of, should I be handling this task? That the answer typically is no, and that you have the ability to delegate that in one of a lot of different ways in today's market.
Well, that's a great way to say, should I be handling this task? People should always be asking themselves that. But if you talk to accounting firms, people seem to think that in accounting firms, accountants have to be doing everything. I'll handle this, and it's dangerous. So what plan features should sponsors consider evaluating this year in particular?
And that's one of my favorite questions right now, because a lot of people understand and they have some knowledge of what their fiduciary role is in their plan today. There's a decent amount of market awareness. People are always looking to save money, but the plan design is often something that people don't look at as an opportunity to handle both of those different functionalities of working on fiduciary and efficiency. So plan design in 2021, maybe some of the top things we're talking about is, number one, reevaluating your company matching formula. So a lot of times when I ask a plan sponsor, tell me about your matching formula and why you have it. They'll say something like, well, we have safe harbor because we're failing testing. Well, how many years have you been a safe harbor plan? 32, well, maybe not that many because we haven't been around that long, but a long time. They've had safe harbor since the inception of their plan when they were 3 people, and now they're 200 people, and it might not be the right fit for them anymore. That doesn't mean that matching isn't the right fit. It's just the way in which you match might need to be something different. Another thing that I tell people is the most common match that we see out there is a 50% contribution to 6%. Why? Well, that's an excellent question. Well, that somebody recommended that to them because we'd love it to be 100% to 6%, but it doesn't make sense from a budgetary standpoint. What people are saying is 50% to 6%, if someone goes just to the matching contribution, then they're getting 6% of their own money, plus they're getting 3% of the company's money. Well, that's 9%. Most generally accepted financial principles are telling you that you need to be saving between 10 and 15% a year for 20 years to be prepared for retirement. So not only is that matching contribution kind of expensive from a plan sponsor perspective, it's not necessarily preparing the participant for retirement. So we've been having a lot of conversations this year about stretch matches, where maybe you take that same 3% budget that it was either your safe harbor or your standard match, and maybe you stretch it and you say that it's 25% that's going to go up to 12%, and do something that's a little bit different so that you might have a similar budget, but you get people to save more of their money and maybe be more efficient with company dollars. So that's one. The second is that we're seeing a lot of people reevaluate and re-educate their participants about their Roth features and their potential ability to do in-plan Roth conversions. Both of those topics are really interesting in today's market because there's just a lot of concern that the tax environment might be changing. And if the tax environment does change, should you consider doing some changes within your current retirement plan on a participant level today, especially if you're retiring and you just start drawing down on those funds in the next couple of years? So reevaluating Roth. And the last point that I'd make is just that there are plans beyond the 401k plan, like non-qualified plans and defined benefit plans that might be very helpful for the plan sponsor and their employees to take best use of their retirement plan dollars.
Those are great topics and great ideas that you brought up. And one of the things you said earlier in this is trying to save money. So people try and do a lot of things themselves to save money. And while this was not retirement plan oriented, I had a client that decided they were with a PEO and they found one that they could go with cheaper. Typical, and everybody's trying to save money on health insurance, stuff like that. But this one was their fees that they were concerned about. In the end, we couldn't get a report for our audit, which says that documents their internal controls. And I said to the client, all right, it doesn't help our audit, but don't you want to have a comfort level that the organization handling payroll aspects has proper internal controls and you're not going to ultimately be held reliable or liable on this? We hadn't thought about that because we were saving money. Okay, it's the adage of you pay for what you pay for what you get for, you get for what you pay for, whatever. Don't try and crimp corners, especially in this area as it relates to employees, because as I said before, DOL, government, they don't want to see you playing around with your employees. So last question I have is, has the education and communication to participants changed much? And I know it's always been a big area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we, on the record keeper side, partner really closely with the financial advisors and consultants that plan sponsors and employers have on education. But one of the things that I would say has been extremely important in the light of the recent both market conditions, needing that efficiency that we've been talking about as a theme, as well as the workforce changing. They're at home, they're not on site. We can't give them education. Everything's electronic and people are very comfortable in a virtual world. I think the table stakes is doing some level of virtual education today, making a webinar available, making a conference call available, just giving them an opportunity to ask questions and get information about the retirement plan, especially if you're making any changes to any of the provisions of your plan. But what I think is really important is that a lot of plan sponsors say, well, we've had webinars, we sent emails, and we did that, so we're good, right? Well, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about in the audit about, well, we need the documentation. It's that whole concept, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it fall, did it actually make a sound? Well, if you sent 10 emails, but you have no documentation that they actually saw it and that the email landed, did it happen? Did they get that information? So what we're talking about right now and what we've been doing with a lot of our plan sponsors is not only providing this table stakes of education, but then really measuring it. So when we send an email, we see how many people did we send it to? Did it get to all those people, or did it bounce? Because if it bounced, you didn't give it to them. It wasn't a communication that actually happened. So we need to know if it bounced, that we need to get that email address updated, or we need to send a piece of paper for a lot of times for these compliance pieces. So we need to know if it bounced. The third is that the people that did land, how many of them opened it? And then also, once they opened it, how many of them took action? And how do those stats compare to others in their industry? Because if you find that others in the industry had a 5% open rate and you had a 0.2% open rate, that message did not resonate with your employees, or they are not, email is not a good form of communication. So we have to track and make sure that it works. And then once we track and make sure it works, then the next thing we need to look at is trend analysis. What we've seen right now is a huge exodus from the equity market last year into the fixed income market, either bonds or cash, right? The cash options. Well, they missed out on a lot if they did that because they got concerned last March, April. Now we need to talk about how do we get them back in? Do they want to still be in cash, or are they just there for inertia reasons? And that's an outstanding fiduciary concern because there needs to have been good education about how to get back in once they got back out. And then to continue to monitor those trends. You're seeing that you normally see, 10 loans a year, and now suddenly we have like 30, 40 loans a year. That's a trend that we need to get in front of and make sure that there's good education around those pieces. So I think that there's two things. Number one, virtual education has become table stakes, and we found it is extremely effective. Enrollment education virtually is extremely effective. But the next part of that is once you know that it's effective, it might not be effective for everyone and for every plan sponsor. So just because we at the Record Keeper system say it's effective, we might not be the case for your individual organization. And so we need to really monitor about if it's being effective for you. And if it's not, you got to change course so that you make sure we're creating that good fiduciary documentation that education is happening and that the plan is effective for your participants, that they're actually getting a good retirement out of it. So those are some of the things we've changed.
Great. I appreciate those comments. The communication, I think, is essential. I've seen too many times where participants will ask the owner, the controller especially, where should I put my money? How much should I put in? You do not want to be providing that guidance because something goes wrong, they're going to hold you responsible. I'm sorry, Allison, to say we're putting it on you, holding you responsible, but you've got to get that away from you as an organization. Most widget makers are not financial planners and financial advisors. And your controller, unless they're a CFP, is not acting as your financial advisor within your organization. Use the services that the Record Keeper provides. I love that phrase that you said, participant-facing party. That's a great way to describe it. We're past the 15-minute mark, Allison. I want to thank you for answering my questions today. I encourage everybody to look up Allison Smith and at the Principal Financial Group. We work with them a lot. Particularly in the audit aspects, we found them to be very reliable and have a lot of great information. So, Allison, again, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for making it to the end of this and hearing all this information. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you.